All right, so are you ready for this one? Because today we're diving deep into a story that, well, let's just say it's a bit of a wild ride.
Oh, yeah, this one's got it all: infidelity, cultural clashes, bad decisions. It's like a soap opera, but real life.
Right, and it all comes from this YouTube video someone sent us from a Cantonese language channel called ASIA,
Which translates to,
Emotional Support Group, for
yeah,
those of us who don't speak Cantonese.
very fitting.
It is. So basically, this guy calls into this online advice show, and he starts talking about his family's domestic helper.
And right away, you get this sense that we're only getting one side of the story,
Oh, for sure. It's all from his perspective.
and he's the one framing the narrative.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So anyway, he's married, has 2 young kids. The wife goes back to work, and they hire this 19-year-old Indonesian woman to help take care of the kids.
He describes her as petite, conservatively dressed, kind of shy at first.
Almost like he's setting the stage for something.
Right, like there's this big reveal coming.
And oh boy, is there ever. So one day our caller, we'll call him Ronald for this deep dive, comes home early, and he finds the helper in her room filming TikToks. But here's the twist. She's wearing some pretty revealing lingerie.
Whoa, okay, things are getting interesting.
Right. And Ronald admits to being aroused by this. And he watches her, which, already kind of sets off some alarm bells.
It's definitely a boundary violation.
Yeah.
Even if she didn't know he was watching.
Totally. But it gets worse. It doesn't stop there.
Oh, no, he doesn't just move on.
Nope. He finds her social media, which is full of even more provocative photos. And then he starts taking and smelling her lingerie, like for sexual gratification.
Okay, now we're in seriously messed up territory.
Right. It's one thing to stumble upon something accidentally, but to actively seek it out.
Yeah.
Like he's crossing a line.
And the power imbalance is huge. He's her employer. He controls her visa status.
It's a recipe for disaster.
It really is. And then it takes an even darker turn.
Mm.
Ronald's wife takes the kids out of town,
Yeah.
and he intentionally leaves the helper alone, comes home early, hoping to catch her dancing again.
And she does catch him watching.
Oh, boy.
She begs him not to tell his wife.
And then
Well, I think you can guess what happens next.
this is where it starts to feel really predatory.
Right. He's creating this situation where he can take advantage of her vulnerability.
And it's not a one-time thing either.
Nope. It becomes a pattern. Whenever his wife is away, they have sex. He tells the show host that he enjoys it, but he's constantly worried about getting caught.
Classic trying to have his cake and eat it too situation.
Totally. He claims he doesn't love the helper, but he's attracted to her youthfulness and her body.
Which is minimizing his actions.
Exactly. He's trying to shift the focus away from the harm he's causing.
And, of course, he's terrified of the consequences.
Right. Imagine if his wife found out. His whole life would implode.
So what does he do? He starts trying to cover his tracks, giving the helper extra money, sending her messages, saying how much he enjoys their time together.
It's like he's trying to create evidence that she's not being coerced.
Right. As if that makes it okay.
The mental gymnastics are astounding.
Right.
And get this, he even considers finding her another job with a friend so they can continue the affair without his wife knowing.
Oh, wow. He's really going all in on this deception.
He is, but the thing is, even if he manages to keep it all secret, there's still the underlying issue of exploitation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We haven't even heard the helper's side of the story.
Right. Her voice is completely missing from this whole narrative.
And the hosts of the online show pick up on this.
Yeah.
They're clearly disturbed by his lack of remorse and his attempts to control the situation.
They even warn him that the helper might start making demands.
Or be influenced by other domestic helpers.
Right. Who might encourage her to take advantage of the situation.
Which is a really interesting point because it suggests that Ronald might not be as in control as he thinks.
It's like he's playing with fire.
And someone's going to get burned.
All right, so we've set the scene. We've got infidelity, manipulation, power dynamics. Where do we even go from here?
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is acknowledge that we're only getting one side of a very complex story.
Right. We've heard Ronald's justifications, his anxieties, his attempts to control the situation.
But to truly understand what's going on, we need to consider everyone's perspective, especially the helpers.
Her voice is the one that's missing.
Exactly. And that's something we need to keep in mind as we dive deeper into this story.
So let's shift gears for a moment and talk about the bigger picture, the context of domestic work in Hong Kong.
This is crucial because understanding the cultural and socioeconomic backdrop is essential for understanding the power dynamics at play.
Right. Hong Kong has this long history of employing domestic helpers, primarily from Southeast Asian countries like Indonesia and the Philippines.
And this reliance on domestic helpers has created a system that's incredibly vulnerable to exploitation.
You've got these women who are often far from their families, working long hours, living in their employers' homes,
And reliant on their employers for visas and other necessities.
which creates a huge power imbalance.
It makes it very difficult for them to speak up against mistreatment or to assert their rights.
It's like they're trapped in a system that's designed to make them vulnerable.
And that's something we need to consider as we unpack Ronald's story and its implications.
We can't just look at this as an isolated incident. We need to see it within this broader context.
Of domestic work, cultural differences, and the very real power imbalances that exist.
So we'll pause here for a second and think about what we've learned so far. We've got Ronald, a man who's clearly struggling with temptation and lacking self-awareness.
We've got a young woman who's been thrust into a situation that's ripe for exploitation.
And we've got a wife who's completely oblivious to the betrayal happening in her own home.
And it's all playing out against a system that often fails to protect the most vulnerable members of society.
So as we move forward with this deep dive, let's keep these complexities in mind.
And really try to unpack the nuances of this story.
And remember, you shared this video with us for a reason. It sparked something in you, raised questions, made you want to dive deeper.
So let's do it together.
What stood out to you in Ronald's story? What resonates with your own experiences or observations?
Let's use this deep dive as an opportunity to not just analyze this particular situation, but to connect it to the bigger picture of power ethics and the complexities of human relationships. You know, it's really striking how Ronald keeps talking about being scared of getting caught. Like, that's his main concern.
Not the harm he's causing, not the potential consequences for the helper.
It's all about self-preservation.
Exactly. Like, he's trying to convince himself, and maybe the show's hosts too, that this is somehow consensual and enjoyable for everyone.
Like, he's trying to rewrite the narrative in his own head.
It's almost like textbook cognitive dissonance, right? When your actions and your values don't align, so you justify your behavior to ease the discomfort.
Exactly. He's trying to convince himself that he's not doing anything wrong.
But even he seems to realize how risky this is. He keeps talking about the potential fallout if his wife finds out.
And those consequences could be huge.
Not just his marriage falling apart.
There could be legal ramifications, too.
Especially given the power dynamics we talked about.
Exploiting a domestic helper in Hong Kong? That's a serious offense.
He could face fines, imprisonment, even deportation.
And what about the social stigma? The damage to his reputation?
His family? His children? It's a ticking time bomb.
It really is.
Yeah.
So let's play devil's advocate for a moment.
Okay.
What advice would you give Ronald? If you were sitting here right now,
Knowing what we know.
how could he even begin to navigate this mess?
Well, first thing I'd say is stop digging the hole deeper.
He needs to cut off contact with the helper.
Completely.
No more trying to control the narrative.
He needs to face reality.
And seek professional help. To understand why he's doing this, why he's seeking validation from someone in such a vulnerable position.
The therapy could be really beneficial. To unpack those issues, develop healthier coping mechanisms.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And he needs to come clean to his wife.
Yeah, that sounds terrifying.
It is.
Hmm.
But transparency and accountability, those are crucial for rebuilding trust.
Sweeping it under the rug will only make things worse in the long run. He needs to face the music.
It won't be easy, but it's the only way forward if he wants any chance of reconciliation.
So we've talked about Ronald's perspective, but what about the helper?
We've spent a lot of time analyzing his actions. But she's at the heart of this story, too.
And we only have a very limited understanding of her side of things.
We don't know her motivations, her fears, her aspirations.
We do know she's young, far from home, working in a foreign country.
Facing cultural and language barriers.
And in a position of significant power imbalance.
Which makes her incredibly vulnerable to exploitation, regardless of her personality or choices.
So let's try to imagine what she might be thinking and feeling in this situation.
She could be scared.
Terrified of losing her job.
Of being deported.
Of what might happen if Ronald's wife finds out.
She might feel trapped, like she has no choice but to comply with his advances.
Even if it makes her uncomfortable. Even if she feels violated.
That's the insidious thing about power imbalances. They can make consent so murky.
People feel like they have no agency, no control.
So what advice would you give to the helper, if she were listening right now?
What resources are available to her in Hong Kong?
Well, first of all, I want her to know that she's not alone. There are organizations that specifically advocate for the rights of domestic workers.
They offer legal advice, emotional support, practical guidance.
She doesn't have to suffer in silence. There are people who can help
Wow,
her.
that's so important for her to know.
And she has rights.
Yeah.
She's protected by Hong Kong law.
She has the right to be treated with dignity and respect.
And she has the right to refuse any unwanted advances.
So if she's feeling scared or pressured, she needs to reach out for help.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And remember, it's not her fault. This is not her burden to bear.
Ronald is the one responsible for his actions.
And she deserves support and protection.
It's interesting that the hosts of the show bring up the possibility of other domestic helpers influencing her.
Right. They suggest that some might see this as an opportunity,
Encourage her to make demands or threaten exposure.
which adds another layer of complexity to this whole situation.
It's not just about Ronald and the helper. It's about the social dynamics within the domestic worker community.
It highlights the fact that this isn't just an isolated incident.
It's a reflection of a system that can be incredibly vulnerable to exploitation and abuse.
So we've talked about Ronald, we've talked about the helper, but there's one more person we need to consider.
Ronald's wife,
The woman who's completely in the dark about all of this.
the woman who's trusting her husband and this young woman to care for her children while she's out working to support her family.
It's heartbreaking to think about her position.
The potential fallout for her is immense.
It raises questions about trust betrayal, the unseen complexities within families.
It reminds us that we never really know the full story of what's happening in other people's lives, even those closest to us.
We make assumptions based on what we see on the surface.
But underneath, there can be so much pain, deceit, manipulation.
So as we continue this deep dive, let's keep Ronald's wife in mind.
What would she want to know? What impact would this revelation have on her life?
These are tough questions, but they're important to consider.
Because Ronald's actions don't just affect him and the helper,
They have ripple effects that extend to everyone in his life.
especially his wife and children. It's easy to get caught up in the drama of this situation.
But we need to remember that these are real people with real lives and real emotions.
This isn't just some salacious story.
It's a human tragedy unfolding.
So as we delve deeper into the ethical and social implications,
Let's try to approach this with empathy,
and a genuine desire to understand the complexities at play,
because that's what a true deep dive is all about,
not just analyzing the facts, but grappling with the human element.
and seeking a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
You know, it's like Ronald thinks he's got this all under control.
Yeah, like you can compartmentalize this whole thing.
Keep it contained. But the hosts of this show, they bring up a point that really gets me thinking. What if the helper starts making demands?
Right. What if the power dynamic shifts?
What if other domestic workers find out and see this as an opportunity?
Suddenly, Ronald's not calling the shots anymore.
He's opened himself up to blackmail, to exposure.
His whole life could unravel.
It's like he's standing on a fault line, oblivious to the tremors building beneath the surface.
That's a great analogy. It seems stable on the surface, but underneath.
It's incredibly unstable.
And the consequences could be devastating for everyone.
So we've talked about the ethical implications for Ronald, but what about the legal side of things?
Hong Kong has very strict laws regarding the employment of domestic helpers.
Right. Exploiting a domestic worker. That's a serious offense.
He could be facing fines, imprisonment,
Deportation, even.
and it could affect his ability to employ helpers in the future.
So there's a very real legal risk here, on top of everything else.
And it's ironic because he's trying to protect himself by documenting everything, like those messages he sends her.
As if that'll somehow prove consent.
It's a futile attempt to control a situation that's already spiraling,
It shows just how scared he is of being exposed.
of facing the music.
At the heart of this whole thing, I think there's a fundamental lack of respect.
Ronald doesn't see the helper as an equal.
Not as a human being with her own agency.
He sees her as an object.
That means to an end.
And that's a dangerous mindset.
Not just in this situation, but in any relationship where there's a power imbalance.
It creates the conditions for exploitation and abuse.
It's a reminder that we need to be aware of those power dynamics.
Not just in our personal lives, but in our workplaces, our communities.
Even online.
We need to be asking ourselves, who has the power? Are they using it responsibly?
Am I part of a system that's perpetuating inequality?
These are tough questions, but they're essential.
If we want to create a more just and equitable world,
And I think that's what makes this deep dive so powerful. It's not just a salacious story. It's a reflection of ourselves,
it forces us to confront our own biases, our own assumptions.
our own complicity in systems that perpetuate harm.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this. What do WE do with this knowledge?
How do we take this and apply it to our own lives?
To our relationships, to our interactions with the world.
Knowledge without action is meaningless.
We need to turn these insights into tangible change.
And that starts with awareness.
Recognizing the power dynamics, challenging the systems,
Having difficult conversations.
speaking up for those who can't speak for themselves,
Taking responsibility for our own actions.
and striving to be better, more ethical, more compassionate, more just.
Thank you for joining us on this journey.
We hope this deep dive has sparked something in you, challenged you, changed you.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, keep pushing for a better world.
That's what the deep dive is all about.